Welcome to this week's episode of Let's Chat with Derick. I am your host, Derick Fage. My guest today has one of the most successful businesses in the entire country, and it's one of the most unique businesses, as a matter of fact, in the entire country. And like many, has been greatly affected by the pandemic. But this is an opportunity, Let's Chat with Derick, to really dive into how this all began. Who is this guy behind Little Ray's Nature Centers? I am joined by its owner, Paul Little Ray Goulet. Paul, how you doing?
Good, Derick. Thanks so much for having me on, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Paul. You're one of many people's mentors for many reasons, including a mentor of mine, Paul. Just following your story over the years, sorry, and how incredibly successful you've been. So I wanted to sort of start back in talking a little bit about your childhood, and I wonder if that had anything to do with your inspiration for opening Little Ray's, many years later. What was your childhood like? Were you always surrounded by nature and animals?
I was, yeah, I guess, I mean, all parts of our life shape who we are, and I grew up in the Northwest Territories. I was born in Hay River. I spent almost 10 years in Yellowknife, so spent a lot of time as with a father that was a very active outdoors person. We spent our time, fishing. He wasn't really an active hunter. He did some hunting, and but we spent a lot of time out on the land. And when we were young, my dad was working for Sports and Rec for the North, and he did a lot of stuff for national sport as well. So we got to travel a lot, and I was always enthralled by animals. I was a dinosaur fanatic when I was a kid. And I started to, whenever we travel, we'd be at a hotel. Yeah, not a surprise. I would find the local zoos and museums, and I'd make my parents take me there. I was, and when I would go to these places, I started to see big snakes and tortoises and alligators. And I remember as a child thinking, I could never own a T-Rex, but a boa constrictor, that's something you could actually have. So I think I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I wrote a story about that moment. And I seem to remember that must have been 7 or 8 years old, just because the memory was so vivid. And it was my mom who read the story, and she's like, "I can't believe you remember that. You were 3." And so it's probably my earliest memories was touching a boa for the first time, and everything basically spawned from there.
Yeah, so let's talk about the beginnings then of Little Ray's. How did it all start for you?
I always tell people I'd like to tell you guys that I'm a really brilliant business person, and it was all a really perfectly calculated plan, but nothing is further from the truth. It was really quite organic. When I was in high school, I loved animals. Zoology would have been a great thing. I would love to do it, but when I looked into zoology as a career, there just isn't that many jobs in zoos in Canada, and so I decided that I was going to be a teacher. I wanted to be a high school teacher slash football coach. That was my goal. Ironically, in hindsight, if I was to go to teachers college now, I think I'd want to teach elementary school. Like I really would think I'd like to be an elementary school teacher. But with all that being said, in high school, I had a few pet reptiles, and I started doing volunteer work to go to classes to talk to kids just about animals to get experience for my teacher's college resume. And when I was done university, I had a teacher. I found homes for my animals. Ironically enough, I'm a rescue organization now, and when I was going away to high school or to university, I had to get rid of the animals we had, but I found homes for them. And good homes. Took a while, but I did. And I had 6 animals. And then I ended up, when I was done university, I had a few pet reptiles, and people started calling me and asking me if I could come back to their classroom. People who I had done programs for 4 years before when I was in high school. You're a little older, you're a little bit more refined. I remember that first program was at a school in Barhaven in spring of 1995. And I showed up, and the night before, I remember thinking about, I want to be a teacher. So what are the gaps? And I didn't want to just talk to the kids about, this is an iguana, this is what it eats, this is how big it is. I wanted them to have a better understanding of the natural world and discuss bigger ideas. And I went to Place d'Orleans Shopping Center. I was living in Orleans, and I went to a store that sells prints and stuff. And I bought a map of the world, one that had the images that had like where there was rainforest, it was green, and where there was desert, it was brown. And I basically took them on a trip around the world. You know, if I'm going to tell them an animal's from Mali or from Africa, like where is that? Like what is that place?
Yeah.
And so to basically show them relatively where they were from and where the equator was, and talked about why the map would be green here. What does that mean if you're in South America? So really focused on larger ideas for animals and stuff. And I remember I did that show, that program at that school. And the next day I had 6 teachers call me that this teacher was raving,
Wow.
had 6 teachers call me literally the next day. And I think the first couple of years of our business, that's what happened. Like we would do one program and 6 people would call, and it just grew very organically that way. By 1998, I wasn't going to teachers college. I was leaving what was, my full-time job to pursue this full-time. And Sherry left her job in 2000. The first zoo opened in November 4th, excuse me, of 2000, and I guess the rest is history.
How do you come? How do you come to have the animals? I mean, because that's something that you've always taken a great amount of pride in, Paul. And a lot of people are like
Yeah,
look at zoos in different ways these
yeah,
days, right? There's no
yeah,
doubt about that, and for good reason. But how do you
absolutely.
acquire the animals that come into your zoos?
Yeah, and just to touch on something you said there, Derek. I mean, people are critical of zoos, and people are critical of farming practices these days too. And I think it's important that people are critical. Farming practices I know are drastically improving for the welfare of animals. Zoos have made drastic changes to protect the welfare of animals, and not all zoos are the same. We tell people all the time we are proud to say that we're an accredited zoo. There's 28, I should know this, accredited zoos in Canada through Canada's accredited zoos and aquariums. We have 2 of them. That's not to say if a zoo is not accredited, they're not a good zoo. And hey, some accredited zoos are better than others, but I will tell you that accredited zoos have very strict governance. They are inspected. They have very strict policies with the care and welfare of the animals. And CASA is truly a world leader in setting standards for animal welfare. So, all this to say that people should be critical of zoos, and they should be critical of animals in human care and make sure that they're getting the best possible care. And people should learn more about CASA to find out exactly what that organization is. And I think there's a big push for that to become a national standard for zoos, and I hope that happens. So, but for us to answer your main question, we very quickly became the largest exotic animal rescue organization in the country. I'd say about 80% of the animals we have come directly from people who have had them as pets. Some legally, some illegally. Some of them are seized. Some of them are voluntary surrenders. We do have some animals from other zoos. We just got some animals from the Toronto Zoo actually that they had on surplus.
Okay.
And some of them do come. We have a very few, but we have a couple animals we've got from people who specifically breed them for zoos and organizations like ours. But the vast majority of our animals are rescues, and that doesn't mean they're all neglected or anything. We do deal with animals that come in that are in really rough condition, that need quite a bit of
Right.
medical attention. But some of the animals we have will live 150 years. You buy that when you're 18 years old. Well, you got to
Yeah.
find a home for it before you're 178. That's just the reality of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess
Absolutely. Well,
160
let's
is
talk about the
my math.
That's okay. I wasn't going to say anything. Paul, let's talk about the growth then. So, back November 4th, 2000, you open up your first place, and, from there, how has it grown?
We from there we started. I remember as early in 2001, like any business, we opened. We were trying to navigate what that would look like. We kind of thought it would be Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. It wasn't quite that easy. And like any business, we're young. We had no funding. Like, we went to the banks. They looked at us like we were crazy. So we were really creative with how we could generate revenue through programs. We've been completely self-funded for the prior to the pandemic. We had got one grant in 24 years for $14,000. We have been completely self-funded throughout our entire operation. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure, but we've survived. And so it was interesting in early in 2001, might have been early summer. Somebody from Sudbury said to us, "Oh my gosh, this is the most incredible place I've ever been. We're from Sudbury. It's too bad that Sudbury doesn't have something like this." And I'm like, we could do something in Sudbury. And I came up with this idea that we would put on a wildlife festival in Sudbury, that we would go there, set up an exhibit for a weekend, and have some local people join us, as well as bring exhibits and stuff, and then do programs in Sudbury. And that was the first wildlife festival we ever did. It was November 16th. We opened 2001. And that part of our business, which has been completely decimated during the pandemic, festivals are shut down. That part of our business, we have grown that we do annual wildlife festivals all over Eastern Canada. We do them in the United States, as well as in Western Canada about every second year. And even from there, as we continued to grow, by 2008, we had released our first really world-class traveling museum exhibit. You see museums like the Canadian Museum of Nature will have Planet Ice as the exhibit they just had. It was there for 3 months. They're reopening now. So we created our first exhibit like that, and it opened in Nova Scotia. Actually, the first one was 2007, and then the real exhibit that was made to tour potentially in Canada and the U.S. The first one opened in 2008. Sherry and I had triplets. As you know, Derek, we have triplets. Back in 2010, kind of put everything on hold. And then by 2014, we started to really market our traveling exhibits that we have across North America. And even right now today, we have an exhibit going on in Atlanta, Georgia. It's been there for a couple months. We have one in Cleveland that's been there from November of last year. And we have one in Florida, and we have exhibits opening in Denver and Park City, Utah this coming fall. So we've really become an organization that does these large exhibits right across North America. Certainly that part of our business has been hurt as much as we have exhibits going on. There's about a year where nothing was happening. So that was something that hurt quite a bit. We're glad that the pandemic didn't come 2 years higher, because we had put so much capital into growing that part of our business. We would have never survived. We would have never, were too much in the growth phase. It would have been nice if it was a couple of years later, because we were just kind of hitting our stride. But anyways, we're happy to still be around and being able to do what we love.
Yeah, well, Paul, you mentioned the pandemic a couple of times there, so let's talk about that, and how hard you've been hit. Maybe you could paint the picture for our viewers.
Yeah, it's been difficult, and I've had lots of conversations with lots of business groups. I've been very privileged to be on lots of calls with government officials, and I've yet to find an industry that has been more disproportionately affected. Certainly the hardest hit sector has been, travel, tourism, events. The event sector has been decimated. With that being said, organizations that care for animals, if you talk about the Toronto Zoo, if you talk about Little Braes Nature Center, if you talk about places like the Biodome, these places that were shut down, the difference between, a festival that we would put on and another festival, the Tulip Festival, whatever one, when they shut down, they can stop their expenses. We can't. During the pandemic, our operational expenses for running the zoo and caring for we can't walk away from the building. We can't turn off the lights. We need
Right.
to feed the animals. We need staff in the building. So our operating expenses, when our revenue, we went from our parent company that does the museum exhibits and the traveling, um, the wildlife festivals and things like that, we went from $2.8 million in revenue to 43,000. That's how much we dropped, but our operating expenses only dropped by 7%. So our
Right.
operating expenses to feed the animals only dropped by 7%. And I'm very loyal to the staff that work for me. Sorry, my neighbor's doing construction, if you can hear that.
That's okay.
Um, I was, for us, we ended up uh, just when our revenue was cut off, the expenses weren't. Like, you still have to feed animals. We still have to pay our veterinarians. We still had to make our loan payments. We had 3 months of interest only, but we still had to make loan payments to the banks. None of that stuff got cut off. We still had to make full insurance payments. So, and a lot of other people were facing that as well. So all that to say, for us, I was really hard pressed to find businesses that any business that was shut down that had the types of expenses that people caring for live animals had. So
Yeah, no kidding. So, I mean, there were, government programs put in place. Tell us about, how you felt the government handled this at different levels, Paul, for a business like yourself. And you mentioned the events business. I mean, that's one that's that we've spoken to quite a
yeah,
few business owners at Rogers TV and that own event businesses, and they've just been decimated, as you said. Have those
yeah.
programs helped at all?
I think that for us, the biggest one, is so frustrating. It was so frustrating and so hard on me very early in the pandemic. We've been a business, and you're very complimentary about how we've grown as an organization. We're an international company now. We create jobs. I made it very public. The 5 years up to the pandemic, we had paid out over $6 million in salaries and collected and paid over $2.3 million in taxes in Ontario. Through different tax programs, if we can call it that.
Right.
And we listened very early in the pandemic to all the support and stuff that was going to come, and then just to find out all that support was really loans. We've had to borrow $1.4 million to survive the pandemic. The good news is, that really frustrated me, I'll be honest. And a friend of
Yeah.
mine said to me, you got to keep this. You have to keep this in perspective. You borrowed $1.4 million. Our gross revenue is close to 5 million when we're running at full capacity. And he said, as frustrating as that is, you basically just bought a townhome in Toronto, and there's husbands and wives that do this that don't run $5 million businesses. So you have to change your perspective. And I think that comment kind of really helped me.
Interesting.
We also
Yeah.
had about $450,000 come in public donations. That was really helpful. Government programs. I was frustrated that we had to borrow our way out of this. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, we're good.
I've got two dogs. It happens.
I, I was frustrated that we had to borrow our way out of this and we weren't able to, but federally the wage subsidy program has been critically important to us. Like, we were able to keep all of our staff employed. We didn't lay off any of our key management staff, and we had to make an investment in that. We were covering 25% of their salaries, but without this, there's a lot of families that pay their bills, that have a mortgage, that have kids, that would have potentially lost their jobs without it. So I think federally, I was disappointed with some of the what I felt was misleading promises. But the good news is that wage subsidy program was there, and I know the Liberal government is talking about extending it to next May if they get reelected. I really wish they did that before they called the election.
Yeah.
Rather than making it clickbait to say, oh, if you vote for us, we'll do this. You could have done it a month ago. But anyways, I'm being patient. And but provincially, it's been very difficult. Provincially, we've received very small grant for our utilities in Ottawa, about $18,000. We have a location in Hamilton that received a $40,000 government grant. Other than that, we haven't. Little Razor Up tells you Ottawa never received the small business grant. We actually applied to the government for our festivals, for 2 festivals, to get grants. Unfortunately, that was through the Reconnect Ontario program that was just announced. Unfortunately, there was 600 applicants. I think there were 400 grants given, and actually we didn't get a grant. That really surprised me, that we've been running festivals for 20 years and we were not successful with our application. So we're working with the province. They can't. There's no way for us to appeal this, so we know we won't get the money now.
Okay.
But we are working with the province. We do have good communication with Lisa McLeod's office. I have somebody there that's been very helpful with us, and they have another program coming more for bricks and mortar tourism type businesses like ours, and hopefully we'll be successful with that. But the reality is that we're still not open, and I don't know that everybody. I say we're not open. We're open at 50% capacity.
Right.
So nobody, and the museum industry in Canada in particular is still largely shut down. Like they're open, but museums right now aren't doing things to drive people in. Our exhibits drive people in. Right now, museums are opening and trying to control flow, and everybody's talking about the 4th wave. So, museums don't want a Little Rays exhibit that's going to have record attendance, because they're just going to turn people away. So we're still navigating that in Canada. The U.S. seems to be, in spite of the challenges right now with COVID-19, they're open. So, and they seem to be a little bit more, not forward thinking, but allowing businesses to open and run. So we're thankful for that. If it wasn't for our U.S. business, we would definitely be hurting a lot more right now.
Paul, I mentioned off the top that I've been following this story very closely on social media. I've seen you on with other media outlets. Of course, you've done many interviews, and one thing that you've brought up has been your mental health struggles, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because you've been very honest about it. Let's talk about how this pandemic has affected you personally.
Yeah, I think I feel very blessed, and I feel very lucky that I've always had a really high tolerance for stress. I've always been able to deal with stress. I've always, probably my whole life, looking back, probably taken on way more than I should have at times. But that's good. I don't like being bored. I had triplets. It worked perfectly. I don't like being bored. And, the pandemic has been really challenging. It's been really challenging to, in my wildest dreams, I never thought that with the how long we've been in business and how successful our business has been, and we have reinvested a ton of money into our growth. So it's not like we were sitting on like $4 million in the bank account when the pandemic hit. I'm very transparent about this. We had $500,000 in our bank account when the pandemic hit in our operating account. So that was our reserve, and we blew through that fast with $85,000 a month in expenses. By July we had no money, and it was crazy how fast it happened. And so now our plan for reserve is different. But so for us, we just didn't. Very early we were being told by our provincial and federal leaders that support was coming and no businesses are going to fall, and I took comfort in that, and to see how long this stuff took, and no action really happening until I felt like I kept getting just pushed up against the wall to my breaking point, and then I would have to make this public appeal, and people would make donations. I've never done that. I've never been like, can you give me money? I need help. Like I felt, and I think one of my breaking points was I was driving to the zoo in January to do a bottle drive. Like we were doing a bottle drive, and I was going in to thank people, to say thanks so much. We had over 210,000 bottles come in, like for a week and a half.
Jeez.
Froze our operations, all hands on deck, just sorting bottles. It was crazy. And as much as it was a ton of work, like it brought my staff to tears at times. The truckloads of stuff coming in, a kid driving from down to, so they could bring like a 6-pack of empty bottles. Man, the gas cost them more than we got for the bottles, but the principle, it was the action. this little girl wanted to bring us these. She wanted to bring us the bottles. So I even now, like, I get chills telling you this, but I was driving in that morning, and a friend of mine from Toronto said to me, "This is crazy. It's like you're a homeless person going through garbage looking for bottles to survive, and you have a massive company." And I was just like, and I sure enough, I posted a video back in January that went completely viral, and it did
Yeah.
get the attention of a lot of people. Unfortunately, we got no money from the government even after that, so that was a bit disappointing. But I do believe that the provincial government and the federal government are really doing their best to navigate this. I have no choice but to believe that support's going to come. So getting back to my mental health, I reached a point back in April where, and I'm realizing it now, I talked to my staff about it this summer, that I just got pushed up against the wall one too many times. And back in April, like I don't think I realized it at the time, but when I look back at it and how my summer has been, I think for me, I absolutely hit rock bottom back in April. Like, I was broken in my basement, literally laying on my floor crying. And the good news is that I do have a fiery personality, and I was so angry that I had been pushed that far. Like, my adrenaline went through the roof. I made a very public appeal. I was very frustrated. I was very angry. And for me, I feel lucky that I can share this stuff and we have a lot of support. But even since then, I've spent a lot of time trying to recover and really work on my mental health and make sure that I'm present. And it was really hard just not being present with my kids. Like, I'm sitting having dinner and all I'm thinking about are the jobs that depend on me, the people who work for me, the animals that we've been an absolute last resort for. Like, we have animals
Yeah.
that are being euthanized. If we don't take them, we are the only people in Canada, and we're going to Alberta to get these animals. If we go down, it's the lives of animals and jobs of countless people. So that weight on you constantly has been at times unbearable. And I even notice now, I told my staff about 2 weeks ago, my tolerance for any additional stress. It's like, I saw a great image, and it was somebody that was carrying a big bag, and someone put something else on the bag, and then someone put something else on the bag, and all of a sudden they get to a tiny little curb, just a tiny little curb, and then that's their breaking point. Right.
Yeah.
So, and people are like, what? It's just a little curb. Like, what's wrong? Why are you freaking out? And I'll share it with you. I'll send it to you. Maybe you could share it on your social media.
Okay.
It's great. And it's just the weight of everything. The second something small happens, everything just floods back. So I'm navigating and getting through that. But thank you for asking about that. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
recovering. So
And Paul, I think sharing your story, certainly so many people relate to it because, as we've said, it's been such a difficult time. Paul, I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Derick, thank you. Great to be doing this interview with you and speaking to you once again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I want to encourage everybody. As Paul said, he is at 50% capacity. So go and bring your family and friends and help support so many people that of course rely on our support here in Ottawa. And of course, the animals certainly rely on us as well. You can visit Paul's website. You can find him on social media as well. Again, it's Little Ray's Nature Center. My name's Derick Fage. Thanks so much for watching another episode of Let's Chat with Derick, and we'll see you next week.